Okay. Zoe Rome, thanks for being here.
Excited to be here in the ether, chatting with you once again.
Yeah, once again. Can you tell people a little bit about who you are right now?
Yeah, I am a journalist and podcaster, and every day I feel weirder and weirder about having to delineate between those two things, but they do feel somewhat separate. And I specialize both in environmental journalism, looking at public land policy in the West, and podcasts about running. We host a running podcast together called The Trailhead.
That's right. I knew I recognized you from...
Yeah, I know I recognized you from my place
somewhere.
of work.
Yes.
from having to listen to your voice for hours on end as part of my paid work.
Oh my God.
And I co-host and produce a podcast called Your Diet Sucks about food, movement, fitness culture, and why pseudoscience is so darn appealing.
Yeah. Maybe we'll get into some more stuff. You're also a running coach as well.
Oh, yes.
Correct.
I'm also a running coach, elite ultra runner, raging theater adult. I am part of an improv group, and I do stand-up comedy. I need to do less things, probably. I'm like a human collage right now.
You know, if you have time, you should just do as much stuff as you like. That's fantastic.
It's
true. Okay. Let's get into your list. This is super fun. First on the list, we put these in chronological order before I hit record, and the first one is Blaylock's Indie Rock Playlist.
So I'm not sure how good idea it is to give the full story on this live on air, but back in the day, I feel like everyone romanticizes the audio medium like when they first got into music. For our parents, I think it was vinyl. I don't know if you have like a thing for cassette tapes or CDs, but coming of age in the early mid-aughts, I still have an extremely sort of romantic, fond relationship to LimeWire, which is a totally illegal music downloading platform. But as like a kid in nowhere Arkansas with pretty limited access to what we would refer to as culture, my primary like pipeline to what was like cool and new and different outside of what I had access to was these playlists that I would find on LimeWire of like all of these bands that I had never heard of. And my favorite of these curated playlists is Blaylock's Indie Rock Playlist. It's every month for over 10 years. This guy, Josh, publishes a list of his 100 favorite songs that came out in that month. And I am obsessed with it. Like, the vibe of it hasn't changed much, which is perfect, because I think I've made peace with the fact that my taste in music is not evolving and not going to get any better, but ideally won't get any worse. And I used to, get these playlists. I would download them onto my giant iPod megawatt device to listen to. And it just felt like a window to a whole different musical world than what I typically had access to in Arkansas. And it sort of felt like this promise of like, if you can make it out of this like weird high school LimeWire phase, this is the world of creative work and of like surf rock and like punk music and this like really more different, eclectic sort of sampling of what was out there musically. It felt like every month I got to see sort of below the tip of the iceberg of what there was to listen to. And I'm still obsessed with these. I think particularly in the age of Spotify and all of this algorithmically driven discovery, I really hate the like computer mixes that AI makes of like, if you liked this song, here's a song that we think you will like, but it never quite captures like, oh, you liked this song because it has like a yearning quality and a killer banjo intro. It always is just like, because these things kind of sound the same. And it always ends up sort of sounding like tapioca pudding to me on the other end. And so having a giant human curated playlist of stuff that still kind of scratches my like mid-aughts indie rock itch every single month feels like a miracle.
Do you remember how you initially found this? Like how you found out about it?
Literally, I think I was like probably typing like indie music into LimeWire, and there was this huge bulk file that I encountered, and
That's
a lot
what
of
it was.
Yeah, and I think it just like I did what one should never do, and I downloaded a giant file to my parents' computer and then just started listening to it and was like, oh my god, like I've never heard stuff like this. It's not coming up on the radio stations where I live, and I was just immediately hooked because it felt transgressive, and it also had this like really handmade indie quality that I'm always looking for, of like bands who just will do it in one take and they keep the one take, or like you can hear like the fingerprints on the guitars, like it still has this like extremely human, not overproduced quality of like college rock. And I went on to be music director at my like university radio station, and I feel like I credit that love of wanting to foist my musical taste on other people to stumbling into Josh's playlists all those years ago.
How much do you know about him? Like, have
Nothing.
you ever, really?
I literally looked his name up for this podcast.
Yeah, it's in the About page, but it doesn't even have a last name. That's like crazy. So you have no idea, like, this person is like really affected your life.
Yeah, huge. Like, would blame this person for a huge amount of life decisions, people I've dated, jobs I've had, t-shirts I've purchased, concerts I've attended, vinyl
Jobs
I now
you've gotten.
own,
Yeah.
jobs I've gotten.
Wow, that's
Now I
fascinating.
work in radio and digital media, and thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's funny to think about trying to explain, like I remember my dad trying to explain to me what 8-tracks were, because he had a few of them left from the 70s, and trying to think of how to explain to my kid what like LimeWire was or Napster. like wait, it was illegal to download music, and like, yeah, it's so yeah, that, and also you could just like accidentally download a giant like a virus to your computer, or like porn, because it was like,
it would
you would just
either
like,
get
what?
like
Whoops.
an amazing Death Cab for Cutie like demo track, or you would end your parents' computer, and you never knew which one it was
Right?
gonna be. But like, I mean, I love listening to things on vinyl, but I feel like, again, like growing up in the mid-aughts, like my connection to this type of music was like downloading stuff from the internet and then putting it on an iPod, which is a thing I miss so much, because it was sort of this, it felt like you had access to more music than you reasonably should, but you still did have to download it. Like, it's not just the Spotify infinite scroll of there's just more than you could ever reasonably have any meaningful relationship to. And I'll hear something once and then never again. But when you have this giant playlist on your mega iPod, you can listen to it again and again and again, and it still has this sort of like tangible quality, and it feels curated. And the constraints of, even though 100 songs is extremely long, like having those limits makes a better playlist, and it's had this same aesthetic from the jump. And I think that the mixtape is a lost art. I think the playlist is a lost art, and we should bring it back.
I have non-public playlists that I put on like YouTube, and I collect on YouTube and on like Apple Music, but the YouTube ones, I enjoy YouTube way more as a music listening app, because there's so many like covers and live performances on there that you don't get on, which you could get on LimeWire, but you don't get on Spotify and Apple, like the corporate music thing. So yeah, I know I have one playlist that's literally all covers of this one Misfits song that I'm blanking on right now for some reason. Oh, Astro Zombies. And it's everything from like,
it's just
from
like 8 hours of Astro Zombies.
It's probably only like 15 or 20 tracks, but it'll just be like somebody covering it with a ukulele, and I'm like, you know what, that's actually pretty dope,
I have to have that.
But you can find that. It's so fun, So
Yeah.
do you have,
I feel like
go ahead.
this is a relic of like, I feel like this is a relic also of like the few years where the internet was awesome and people were kind to each other, and it was like primarily a big weird message board where we were all talking about like niche subcultures, and like, things were fun and joyful rather than kind of what it has become. And I feel like these playlists also sort of like harken back to and romanticize that particular moment in the internet where it was like a kinder, gentler, weirder place.
Yeah, maybe more mysterious too, where you
More
like
mysterious.
you could find that track, but you couldn't find out much about the artist, maybe, or anything like that.
Yeah.
Do you have a memory of like some of the early songs or artists you discovered through these playlists?
Oh man, I do. I remember hearing a cover of a New Order song by a band called Jukebox the Ghost, and because I was a young woman, had not quite yet been exposed to the deeper cuts from New Order, the song was Temptation, and that cover just blew my mind. I was like, this is the greatest song ever written, and it sounds even better with this like extremely doofy sort of like overdone keyboard bit that the band was doing. And I would just like ride the bus and listen to that song over and over and over. And another one I was obsessed with was the song Welcome Home by Radical Face, which like went on to become actually popular, and you get to have that incredible feeling of like, I knew it before it was like in an Apple commercial.
Oh, did it get, the first time I heard it was Uli Steck, the alpinist, was like speed climbing the Eiger, and it was in a film that...
Yeah, now it's in like all ski films.
Yeah. Boy, that was a long time.
But first it was on my iPod.
Yes, right. Yeah. I miss iPods. I miss, like, there's something about the finitude of like not having everything. And I think like dating is probably, harder nowadays because you're just like, oh, it's infinite who I could maybe encounter. I don't ever have to settle or like pick.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, I don't have to settle or pick an imperfect person or whatever, compared to like, there's always the opportunity of something else over the horizon. Like,
and I think that constraints are actually really important for creative work. Like that's one of the one of the things that's great about vinyl is how constrained it is, and like putting together an incredible album that fits on like such a small piece of plastic is pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. And I think that leaning into those constraints rather than now so much of music is dictated by like what will go viral in a TikTok, and the music that was incentivized by the sort of like weird nichey subculture that like I think Brian Eno would call it like sceniness of like mid-aughts indie rock. The incentives were really different, and the incentives were fun, and there's always going to be constraints, but the constraints meant that we got a lot of like really interesting, weird, innovative music with people trying shit and trying to get it out there, and people really wanting to share and advocate for the cool music they were discovering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who was it who had the album of like 10 one-minute songs a few years ago?
Tierra Whack.
Yes. Yeah, it was actually pretty amazing. But it was just kind of like her producer was just like, you can't focus on anything. Let's just put this out. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Number 2 is a book called About a Mountain by John D'Agata, who I feel like I haven't read this book. I heard about this book through our mutual friend Nick Triolo.
This feels very Nick-coded.
Did you introduce him to it, or did he introduce you to it, or is that not even a connection?
I feel like with all things with Nick, most likely it would be one of those things that like a couple beers deep at a bar where you're like, oh my god, I love that book, no way! So the book is About a Mountain by John D'Agata, who is I think he's one of the most interesting, if not great, creative nonfiction writers, which is kind of a bizarre genre that I feel like he kind of defines for me, which I probably, if I had to name a favorite genre, would be this one, which means taking sort of real stories and stretching them as far as one can credibly do while still claiming to be engaged in nonfiction. And so this book, I think a lot of times when you're describing a great book, the description of any great book inevitably sounds like the worst, most annoying book of all time. Because for me, this book is, yes, it is about a specific mountain, Yucca Mountain, outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, at the time where the federal government was soliciting feedback on wanting to deposit nuclear waste inside of Yucca Mountain and how that impacted surrounding areas. And I'm pretty sure, I stumbled into this book because it had the word mountain in it. I was like, great, don't need any, that's all I need. There's a mountain, perfect. And I think it is an amazing example of environmental literature that also really stretches what we might define as being environmental literature, because yes, it's about Yucca Mountain, but it's also a lot about Las Vegas, Nevada, and about, capitalism, nuclear waste, life in America, all of these big themes that John D'Agata teases out through what I think I can only describe as like found literary objects almost. Like, yes, there is like reportage in this book, but it's also interspersed with newspaper clippings and flyers that he's found or transcripts from BLM meetings. And it creates this incredible collage that really does feel to me like an encapsulation of what it feels like to be alive right now, and thinking about the environment, both the natural environment and the built environment, and what it means to relate to those things in a language, like a sort of disjointed, eclectic, found objects language that to me sort of simulates a lot more of what it feels like to be alive today, which isn't just the, like sort of two-dimensional, like typical journalistic, novelistic style of writing, but is bringing in all of these different threads to tell a really complicated story in a way that I think feels extremely modern and challenging.
When you say stretch, is it like in what way? Is it This is one of the best parts of this book, is that he stretched the facts of this book so much that he ended up writing a play about how difficult the fact-checking process of this book was, because it was originally intended to be a magazine article for Harper's Bazaar, and they hired a fact-checker named Jim Fingal to fact-check it, and Jim Fingal quickly was like, oh my god, absolutely not. Like, what the hell with this book? It is unfact checkable. And John D'Agata was extremely effusive and made this poor fact checker's life extremely challenging. And that Harper's Bazaar ended up not publishing the article, and it went to a smaller literary magazine that had slightly different fact checking standards and was a little more comfortable publishing it as like creative nonfiction, emphasis on the creative. And from that process, the play, A Lifespan of a Fact, was born. And being so bad at facts that someone writes a play about, you write a play about yourself, is a pretty enviable journalistic distinction of like, your fact check led to an exploration of the original work in an entirely different medium, which I think the way that these two pieces are in conversation with each other is fascinating. And if people ever have the chance to, read Lifespan of a Fact, also incredible, but to see it performed, it's like an action thriller about fact checking. And I, in grad school, I helped like pay for stuff by doing freelance fact checking and have an immense appreciation for that extremely quirky job. But this book about a mountain stretched so many things. There were composite characters, and there's some sort of poetic license taken. But I feel pretty comfortable with that because, not in terms of the debate of like we all live in a weird fractured reality and no one knows what's up anymore in a way that's like disturbing and that I don't totally have an answer for. In literature, sort of being confronted with the mystery of any particular story, being just sitting in tension with, is this real, is it not? For me, when I'm reading this book, I don't really care because the story that comes out the other end is just so dang good. Yeah, kind of like I'm thinking of the Vietnam book, What the Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. Where
Tim O'Brien.
It's a little where you're like, oh, is that all? Was that actually nonfiction? Not sure.
Yeah, and
or is it fiction? Yeah.
And I think creative nonfiction is such an interesting and slippery genre for that reason. And again, one could ask a bunch of really tedious questions about like, well, does nonfiction actually exist in a universe where we're all subjective? And that's probably a much more annoying conversation for a different and worse podcast. But I think that being able to really bravely and brazenly combine so many different source materials and storytelling approaches. When I read this book, I was just like, holy fuck. I didn't know you could do that in a book. And oh my God, this guy just did this thing. And it was so punk rock and so weird and so hard to pin down. And he now is John DeGata is a teacher at the Iowa Writers Workshop, this like extremely famous, like all the good writers go there except for the ones who don't. And he has written one other book called Hall of Fames, where he travels across America to visit all the various Hall of Fames, which is slightly less readable than About a Mountain.
Yeah.
It's a little more form breaking in a way that I don't know that I recommend for like folks who aren't really down to go on a journey with their book.
That sounds really fun to do, actually. I wonder if he got some sort of grant for that. Like,
I think he got like paid by Grey Wolf Press. Just like, the last thing you wrote was freaking great. Take this and go.
Make us another one. Oops, you didn't.
Do that again.
Yeah. That book is like not amazingly successful. I'm looking at the Amazon page and it only has like 65 reviews.
Which
but
I mean, it's
yeah.
I would highly recommend About a Mountain to everyone, and I would cautiously recommend Halls of Fame to people who are just like, fuck it, let's get weird.
Yeah. Where did you see the play?
Here in Carbondale, actually. It was put on by our local theater. Yeah, one of my really good friend from my improv group, Jack, was the star. And it was awesome. Like, because it feels like it's part of the John DeGata extended cinematic universe. So this extremely niche book that I have a really strong connection to, like there is no audio version of this book. Like it is not everywhere. Like I feel like it's pretty avoidable, which is unfortunate because I think it's an astounding read. When, living in a town of 6,000 people, out of the 4 plays put on here per year, one of them is specifically in conversation with like my spirit book. I was pretty excited.
So you'd read the book and then the play arrived in Carbondale. Yeah. Oh, yes. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, yeah, that kind of feels like destiny in a way.
And I mean, again, I would just recommend everyone read it and then read Lifespan of a Fact, which I think is a slightly less squirrely piece of work to wrap your hands around. It's a pretty accessible play. And I mean, I'm just down for any action thriller that's about how journalism is actually exciting.
Yeah, there's a couple books I think of when I think about that, and it's like Tom Wolfe's books about like the right stuff,
like the new the
new journalism stuff, and then like the sort of like speculative, like The Perfect Storm, where you're like, well, they all died, but here's what we think might have happened, and then there's one called Into the Raging Sea, and I forget the author's name, but it's like The Perfect Storm, but for shipping container ships that want to just go straight into a hurricane, and they're like, and you're like, how did they get all this like audio footage that she's actually like building the narrative around, and like, and they had recorders in the ship, and the ship, of course, sank to the bottom of the ocean. Like I think it's 2 miles deep at that point. So part of the book is about this grid search that they did for the black box on this ship, which apparently is not that small, but it's still small,
Yeah.
And it was
compared
like incredible.
To the ocean.
Yeah. Yes. So those are like kind of what I think of, and I'm probably not even close to what you're talking about with About a Mountain, but it does sound super.
No, it sounds like in that vein.
Yeah. Number 3 is called Ways of Hearing, a podcast by Damon Krukowski, the drummer of Galaxy 500. I have no familiarity with this. What is it?
Oh my gosh. You will love this, Brendan. So this was a limited series podcast, and I'm a huge fan of podcasts that aren't ongoing, but that just like step up to the mic, say their piece, and then they're gone. Damon Krukowski also, now because everyone has a Substack, he has a pretty great Substack sort of about analog listening culture, but this podcast, Ways of Hearing, is all about what it means to record music and listen to it. So the first episode is about the concept of time and thinking about how digital audio and music recording and radio uses a different sense of time than we use in our offline life. He interviews folks from A Tribe Called Quest and looks at like the concept of swing time in jazz music and how analog recordings are, well, one of the things that he talks about that sticks with me so much as someone that still is pretty passionate about recording things, even albeit in my own way, into like a cheap digital microphone for the internet to enjoy for 9 days before forgetting and moving on to the next thing. But like that idea of anytime you listen to a song, you're not actually listening to a song. You are listening to a moment in time where 5 people or whatever were in a room, and you're hearing what that song sounded like on that day at that particular moment in time as those people played it. And hearing that changed how I listen to music forever. And it makes it harder to engage with music as like a background thing, because now I get so caught into trying to experience the reality of that song and how it's happening in real time, rather than just like, oh yeah, like, you know, whatever, listening to this thing. And there's also an episode about the importance of ear contact, and to the extent that people kind of have been trying to guard their hearing from the noise of the world, and about noise canceling headphones and everyone's propensity to walk around with stuff in their ears all the time. And I think that this, and there's only 3.5 episodes of, or there's like 5.5 episodes of this. But it is so interesting to hear a musician talk about how he thinks about making music, recording it, and listening to it. And I think, again, as someone who really loves and is passionate about consuming media, but also sort of suspicious of that relationship as that of a consumer, and wanting to actually have some sort of relationship to the things I'm listening to other than just like gobbling down a ton of slop, and being able to think of every song I listen to as a real moment in time, a thing that happened, a feeling that was had by a person who wrote it down, kind of still explodes my brain every time I listen to it. And one of the reasons I love podcasting as an audio format, and the reason I wanted to go into audio journalism originally, was because audio is such an intimate medium. When you write a word, you're writing a thing down, and it gets like printed or published and sent away, and it sort of exists in the ether, and someone has to read it in order to relate to it. But when you're making sound that's recorded, by the time people are actually hearing my voice as we're recording it, my voice will actually be physically interacting with their eardrums. It is going into their heads to physically vibrate this like delicate little part of their inner ear, and then that sends a signal to their brain and they hear my voice. So unlike reading, which does not physically touch the person doing it more often than not, when you're listening to something, you're actually having a physical, real-time relationship to it.
Yeah. I wonder about that and the rise of podcasting and interview shows. I always have thought that people love interview shows because we don't have so many conversations with people we're interested in anymore. Does that make sense? I don't have this group of interesting friends, but I can access this group of interesting people through this podcaster who interviews people I find interesting. Because I'm always like, what the hell? How do people have time to listen to a 3-hour podcast? And
dude.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it does come out of, some of what we talked about with playlists earlier of I actually think the constraints of rather than, I think listening to experts is cool and yada yada, it's my job, we should do that. But I think sometimes people get really bogged down into trying to over-optimize every part of their lives, every bit of media they consume. So rather than I'm just going to have a chat with Brendan where I somewhat poorly describe how audio works in a romantic way, rather than listening to that, people I actually want to hear what so-and-so from USC expert in child hearing pathology has to say about it. And I actually would advocate more for us settling for our friends' shitty takes in the real world. I think that that's important, and we're losing out on our closest friends' bad takes, because those are great and important. And I always think about back in 19th century Paris, they would have these salons where it would just be smart people who kind of didn't have jobs other than occasionally writing a poem or a bit of philosophy that got rejected from whatever newspaper. They would get together and just chat about shit. And I think that, you don't necessarily have to be Simone de Beauvoir, to get a bunch of people together in a room, add some liquid, and have a good time.
Yeah. And also, like, what does that do to you if all you listen to is experts, as opposed
Yes.
to...
It'll make you insane.
Right? It's also maybe not that fun. I don't know. That's an interesting question to think about.
I think it limits how much you are actually thinking about and engaging with the material, because likely that person knows more than you and is going to have a better take. But your friend's shitty take, I would say, is more likely to spark interesting debate and relationship to whatever the subject matter is.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really interesting thing to think about. Huh. Yeah. So you say there's like 5.5 episodes. Like, is one's just short? It's like short, or do they just cut off in the middle?
Yes. One is he was featured. This podcast was featured on the other podcast, Song Exploder, and they do a Song Exploder episode about how to make the podcast.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Number 4, Nathaniel Russell's art. And you emailed me this and explained a little bit in a paragraph, and I have to show you that I own Nathaniel Russell's
No way! Oh my
book.
God!
Public notice of all these fake flyers. Is that
flyers.
a more polished
Yeah.
version? Okay.
It's
and
the
they're
one
just...
where, like, you get it and it comes with all of these different flyers that you're encouraged to post around.
I wonder if they have the same ones in there. Because I follow him on social media, and at some point he was like, hey, I just found like 100 of these that they were in a storage unit. I was like, I'll buy that, and bought one.
That's amazing.
Can you describe what we're talking about, like what we're holding up here?
So Nathaniel Russell is an artist, I'm not sure how he would describe himself, who makes these extremely weird, silly, and quietly profound fake flyers and posters. He does some like commercial art. He's done like a Wilco album cover and like does like different posters for music festivals and whatnot. But I remember the first time I saw a flyer on the wall of a guy I was dating in college, I was like, that is the greatest shit I have ever seen. And it is, I think it's extremely funny to take the idea of a flyer and to make it into art in ways that aren't immediately obvious. And I think the thing that really gets me about this art is always the juxtaposition of the very poorly written sentences and the really profound ideas that they're trying to carry. Like this one says, "Help wanted, Freedom Cruise, we ship out at dawn, no hassles," and just has a picture of a boat. Like, one of my favorite ones has a picture of a duck, and it says, "Found, don't come looking for him, we're bros now."
Yes. I know this one, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so it's like taking the idea of like lost dog posters or like support group posters and making them about like, let's go to outer space, let's have a summer picnic, and these kind of like sweet, funny things that are really hard to capture in art. He also has this amazing drawing of, I need to find the one of Sisyphus. Hold on. Oh yeah, he has this amazing poster of Sisyphus that says, "Inspirational message. Keep trying that thing," and has a picture of a guy pushing a boulder up a hill. And I think the weird disjointed syntax and the sort of like found materials quality of the photos he uses and of the way that he sort of uses his own printmaking makes this extremely fun art that is always really surprising and really delightful. And I think that people go looking for a lot of different things from art. Delight is not usually something I'm looking for, but it's something that I increasingly need. But it has to sneak up on you for it to be impactful. And Nathaniel Russell's art always sneaks up on me and always delights me.
So your original exposure to it was a fake flyer that was on somebody's wall, on your college boyfriend's wall.
Yep.
Wow, he's been at it a while. I guess these flyers are from 2016, so it's not new. That's funny. I'm like, art that is like delight in art is like, I think of a lot of artists I follow on Instagram, and I'm like, I don't know if delight is the emotion I would say happens all the time, but like humor is generally what I'm looking for in a lot of it. And like, you know,
and I think it's that mix of like, again, both humor and profundity, because there'll be, you know, one poster will have a joke about a duck being a dog, and the other one will be like, let's go to the moon. And it also has this like dead serious quality that I think is extremely funny and extremely earnest. And I think it's just that fun mashup that also helps recontextualize other things out in the world. Now, whenever I see another like actual flyer, reading it sort of through the Nathaniel Russell lens makes all the like sort of charming mistakes and the like sort of bad handmade quality of, you know, all the things we see on telephone poles and on different like on the cork board at the coffee shop. It makes all of those things seem so much more fun and so much more charming, and helps me re-see them so much more as these genuine attempts from one person to reach another person through kind of a funky medium. And I think that's part of what I find so compelling about them.
Have you ever created a fake flyer for
no,
the purpose
but I've
of comedy?
Because I have my I did create a fake flyer for, we have Aspen Ideas Festival once a year in Aspen, and I wanted to make flyers for Bad Ideas Festival, which is a thing that doesn't exist. So made some Bad Idea Festival flyers.
Maybe it's an alternate festival to have at the same time, like Carbondale Bad Ideas Festival. I want to host Bad Ideas Festival and do one of my favorite improv formats is called the Ass Cat, where you have someone do a monologue and then you improvise long form theater based on that monologue. And I mean, back to the Nathaniel Russell of it all, one of the things I find so funny about the flyers is they'll always just like, they'll have a time or a place, but it's never got all of the information that would quite make it make sense. People show up. Yeah.
Yep. Yes. And in high school, I was, because I've always had this booming radio voice, I was in charge of announcements for my entire high school. And once a week, every week, I would announce a meeting of the John Candy fan club, giving either the time or the place, but never both, just to see if anyone ever tried to actually come to the John Candy fan club.
And did anybody ever, like, were they just like, hey, I'm curious, I really actually want to come to this. Where is it? Like,
I had someone mention that, like, there was a guy, one of my friends was like, blah, 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 this guy, is he in the John Candy fan club? I might go to that. It's like, don't think that's the place to meet men, but I could be wrong. What do I know?
There is the John Candy documentary. Did it come out already? Have you seen? Okay.
Yeah. It's good. Very sad, but good.
Okay, you saw it. Okay. Yeah. I did put up a fake flyer when I lived in Denver. A buddy of mine made these like flyers that were like up for a lost bear. You know, people lose a cat or a dog, and this is like, God, this must have been like 2008 or something like that. And we thought that was pretty funny. And I don't know if this was before or after that, but I had seen one online that was Beaker from the Muppet Show. You know, Beaker only says meep 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 meep. Yeah. And it was a photo of Bunsen, and it just said the big headline at the top was meep, and there's all this meep 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 meep, and then like all the little tear off strips were like meep meep
just
meep.
Like meep. That's amazing. Yeah, I love the fun, quirky, like tear off strips of like every so often you'll see a poster where it's like, do you need a small piece of paper with numbers on it? Take one.
Yes. Yeah, it's just fun, you know, and like to like double take on a flyer is like that's an art form right there, you know,
that's
like making that happen. And there's really no policing of these things. Like you go to like the coffee shop where they're like hung up and they're like, there was a fake ad that I found in our vegan donut shop here for it was like dog meat is what it was called, and it was like essentially you could buy meat that was made, it's dogs, like is what they were saying, and it was like meat,
it's dogs.
Yes, and it's this satirical website that's like run by like militant vegans or whatever, and I thought it was so hilarious. I was like, this is amazing, you know.
That's because it like flyers inherently again have this like DIY sort of anarchic quality that I'm always looking for, that like you can't get on the internet because everything feels formulaic or like it's meant to go viral. Like everything is meant for maximum attention capture, whereas like flyers have very limited attention capture, and they're just kind of inherently not that great. I think that's what makes them so charming, is it's such like a flawed, imperfect attempt on the part of one human to communicate something either extremely specific or like extremely big to one other person, of like, come to this support group, help me find this dog, help me find this cat, or I'm selling dog meat.
Yeah. I saw one on, like, I was running on our multi-use path, and it was on a telephone pole, and it was somebody had just literally printed out a Facebook post about their lost cat and put it on paper. And I thought, wow, that's really, what is that? It's either meta or the opposite of meta. You know, like, what?
This is either really interesting art or a 65-year-old woman.
And then I thought, why
Maybe
not?
both.
Why wouldn't you do that?
Why not both?
Right. Yeah. So, okay. Number 5, Lady Bird, the Greta Gerwig film.
Oh, man.
Which we discovered came out in 2017, 2018.
Because, like, to me, this still feels like an extremely new, like, this is 21st century film canon. But, man, I love this film, and it was the directorial debut of Greta Gerwig, potentially my favorite director. And this movie sort of, like, this is one of the films that I remember the theater I saw it in, like, the shirt I was wearing. I remember everything about that night so specifically and vividly, because this movie also blew my mind. And I think that growing up as a lover of film, we're offered all sorts of built for guys, every single coming of age story for every type of guy. And one might think, looking at the American film canon, that girls simply don't come of age. We're like born full women, or we're the 20-year-old blondes in any comedy meant to like laugh at like Seth Rogen's jokes. And this film, I think for the first time that I saw in a way that really resonated with me, put girlhood in this, it made art out of girlhood. It took seriously the concerns of being a girl, of wanting to talk about boys and to giggle and laugh and eat Cheez-Its in the front seat of your car while crying listening to Dave Matthews. And those sense memories for many girls are so acute that seeing them on the big screen, captured by, again, this incredible visionary director who makes these really silly but also profound bits of girlhood, renders them as art, was amazing, because I was so used to seeing other people's lives represented in that way, other people's experiences, that like the life of a suburban teenage girl in California, seeing it rendered as real art was really amazing. And the structure of this film is structured like the 12 Stations of the Cross, because Greta Gerwig is a good Catholic girl, and it also gives it sort of this like pitches the tone upwards with almost like a bit of religiosity. And I think that that's a really fascinating tone to think about girlhood in. And so often any creative work about girlhood is like seen as lesser than, like it's it's either it's like a chick flick or chick lit, and it's cast as this like lesser than thing, and it's like pink and it's small and it's stupid, and the concerns of women aren't nearly as interesting as all of the things that we see in the great male film canon. And I love that this movie is about young female friendship. I love that it's about having a challenging relationship with one's mom and trying to figure out who you are, and about falling victim to the charms of Timothée Chalamet. All very relatable things.
I was going to say, I wonder if that's why the film doesn't feel very old, because Timothée Chalamet has not aged since it came out.
Not at all.
And probably Saoirse Ronan. I feel like, did I not know the thing about the Stations of the Cross? Is that like a...
It was a thing I read in an interview with her like years and years ago. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I'm like, man, did I just miss that? That's fantastic.
I would not say that it's extremely obvious upon watching.
Okay. Yeah. So you said you remember being in, where is the theater, and what shirt were you wearing?
At the Cherry Creek Theater in Boulder, was wearing a green shirt with a black sweater over it. And I remember this because I was supposed to meet up on a date afterwards, and I remember absolutely just talking at this poor gentleman about the movie the entire time. Like, really did one for feminism by Zoe splaining a movie to a man.
I haven't dated in a long time, but I have a friend who has, like, in the last 10 years, and I feel like many of her experiences were the opposite of that with a guy. Like, she would literally text Hillary and say, this guy's been talking for 6 minutes nonstop, has not asked me a single question. So maybe you're just evening the score a little bit there.
Whereas I was like, here's why you have to understand why it is so funny that she's referencing Sondheim throughout this movie. This poor guy was just like, oh my God, never again.
Do you remember other things you brought up in that conversation, like fresh out of the theater?
I just remember telling, like, I had seen this movie the first day it came out, had, like, gotten, like, a ticket ahead of time, and I had taken my roommate at the time to see it, and we exited the theater, and I looked at her, and I was like, oh my God, that was incredible. And she was like, yeah, it was pretty good. And just being like, oh, we just had really different experiences. Okay, interesting. And, I mean, that's also what makes film amazing, is that, like, people can have really radically different experiences. And I mean, I think that anyone can watch that film and enjoy the story of it, and it's made extremely well. But I think that it does what, in creative work, often we talk about how the specificity is what makes things universal. And it has that auteur film quality of being so specific that I relate to every element of it, even though I don't relate to every element of it. And it feels so much like the product of a person's, like, vision, like the creative work they were born to make, and they made it. And I think especially in, like, big film culture, we don't get to see that extremely frequently, definitely not from women. And so when you get to see this, like, big piece of mass-produced media that is so specific and then so carefully made and has that, like, handmade human quality that's, like, kind of a thread throughout all of these works, I was just like, like, that feeling of, oh my God, art is alive. We're gonna be okay, you guys. Like, we did it. We made an art.
Yeah, and she got to go on to make the Barbie movie, which was probably a dream come true for like, with
also
the budget
slaps.
And all. Do you think so? There's, like, I remember one of the things I remember about the film is the conversation Lady Bird, Saoirse Ronan's character, has in the pool with her. She becomes, like, she gets to hang with the popular crowd for, like, a few weeks or whatever, and she's in the rich, popular girl friend's pool, talking about how much she can't wait to leave Sacramento, and the popular girl's like, I love Sacramento, like, I want to stay here. Do you feel like there's something, like, is that something you have in common with that character? Is that, like, wanting to leave the place to discover other, like, leave your hometown, leave
100%. Again, being from a pretty small town, I grew up in rural Washington County, Arkansas, and, like, spent my entire childhood just like, what do I got to do to get out? And just like Saoirse Ronan she talks about wanting to go to a school on the East Coast where writers live in the woods, and I had that exact same program. It was like, I am going to be Thoreau. Like, surely we're going to have, like, a transcendental revival, and I will be at the tip of the spear, despite the fact that I actually don't love New England. And just, like, I mean, I ended up going to college in my hometown and sort of had, like, saw Lady Bird at the time in my life when I was in grad school and had finally, like, done the thing, had finally jumped ship and was, like, out on my own, having, like, left home, and had that, like, same challenging feeling of maybe, now being a little further removed, really dearly loving the place where I'm from. Arkansas is an incredible place. I love it so much. I get so upset when other people talk down on it, and yet it is the butt of, like, 90% of my jokes, because it is also an extremely weird place and an extremely hard place to be from. It's not a place where I would, like, necessarily recommend, like, go raise a family with, like, a lot of independent, like, free-thinking daughters there. It'll be great. And totally related to that idea of both, like, really loving where you're from, actively romanticizing it, and being like, my whole existence is kind of premised on being anywhere else for a while.
Yeah. There was another question I had about, the soundtrack. So the scene where they're crying in the car listening to Crash Into Me by the Dave Matthews Band. I believe it's a 60 Songs That Explain the 90s episode where they delve into that song, and, like, I think they touch on Greta Gerwig having this quote somewhere where like, no, I just like that song. What's wrong with like I know that people don't like it and it's not cool, but I'm like, and she makes this case for embracing things that maybe other people don't think are cool or have fallen out of favor.
And I feel like that's what good creative work can do really well, because like I, like any other like high school girl in Arkansas in the, like early 2000s, love Dave Matthews Band, absolutely had like a Dave Matthews Band CD in my vehicle at all times, like as is basically state mandated. And when I left home and realized that is not cool, it was like, oh yeah, no, like, boof, like who likes that stuff? Like, bro music, so lame. And then seeing it in Lady Bird and having just like the full body sense memory of like, I have also definitely cried in a car to this song, and seeing it again rendered on the big screen as art, I was just like, no, this is fucking good. This is what art is. Like, it recontextualizes that whole song. And she, we hear a lot about the idea of millennial cringe and how us millennials are, like, so intolerable with our, like, earnestness and just, like, desire to relate honestly to things. And I see so much of myself in that idea of just, like, no, screw it. Let's reclaim DMB. Like, we got it. Crash Into Me is a banger, and you can't deny it.
I wonder what the age range for people who had that experience in the theater, like you did with that song, because I listened to the Dave Matthews Band in college, like owned probably every album up through a certain point, and then just like kind of just stopped for a very long time and just have never hit play on a Dave Matthews Band song. And then that came up and I was like, oh yeah, Dave Matthews Band. And I was like, I really did like that album he did at Luther College with Tim Reynolds, and like,
yeah, and like, I have this, like, now that I'm, like, getting older and I'm anxious about my relationship to popular culture and if I'm cool and relevant and, like, still having this desire to be like, I'm listening to good things, like, I'm a good person, I have good taste, and realizing that is, like, A, a thing that has never existed, and B, certainly is not my reality now, just, like, unapologetically owning, being like, oh, actually, I decide if this shit is cool. I'm Greta Gerwig, and I'm putting Dave Matthews Band in my film, and it's cool now.
Yeah, there's a bumper sticker I see in a car in our neighborhood somewhere when I'm running by a lot, and it says, I may be old, but I got to see all the good bands, or all the cool bands. And I always think, that's just like, literally everybody who ages thinks that, You're like, yeah, the music was good back in my day, and then like, you only say that because you're like 40 to 75, like that's the only reason you say it, or maybe 35 to 75.
Right.
I don't know.
You hear people talk about the Eras tour, and it's like how it's like when Dylan went electric, like that's just a slightly different cultural touch point.
Your Woodstock or something like that.
Yeah, that's our Woodstock.
Yeah.
Again, girl shit, let girls make art at scale.
Yes, at scale. Yeah, there's something to, I think, of the narrative of like leaving your hometown again. And like, I always have had this weird experience when I meet people who have come from someplace interesting and they just stayed. And like, it doesn't, I don't understand how that doesn't fit my narrative map of someone's life, like,
I'm just like, what did you spend your teenage years being angsty about? Like, if not obsessing about getting out, like, what did you even write your college essay about? I live somewhere nice and my family accepts me? What the fuck?
Did you have angst at all? Were you just like, I don't know, it's cool here, it's the best. Yeah.
Probably didn't have good playlists.
I had one more question for you. Other Greta Gerwig films.
I mean, everything she has ever been in and made is perfect to me. I think honorable mention is Frances Ha, which she kind of ghost directed, which is another, I would say, incredible piece of girl art, even though it's written and directed by Noah Baumbach, who honorary girl as co-author on the Barbie movie. But that's another movie about being in your 20s and kind of trying to make it happen, and it's just not happening, but the just not happening is actually so fun and exciting, and maybe not reaching your dreams and not quite making it in New York City can also be beautiful when you film it in black and white and you have Greta Gerwig act in it and Noah Baumbach write in it, and sort of, I think, captures this like extremely fun, also resonant sort of like Brooklyn, a little too smart for your own good, but you're also not quite as smart as you think you are way of being, where like having good taste in things also is not quite enough to make up an entire human personality that one can navigate life with.
You've just described the entire premise of this podcast, that liking good art is like, that's, because the argument here is this is your entire personality, or much of it anyway, or much of who you are as a person.
This is like my like material DNA.
Yes. I think that's actually a great place to end it. Thank you so much for taking the time. This has been super fun.
Thanks for having me.